Rarely has a premier had approval ratings as low as Ontario's Kathleen Wynne. Only twice in the last half-century has a rookie leader won his first election, as Patrick Brown hopes to do. And even rarer still has the NDP formed government in this province, as Andrea Horwath aims to do next year. Where do things stand now, 8 months before the next grand consultation with the people? Let's ask Greg Lyle. He's president of the Innovative Research Group. He's got fresh data for us to chew on. And Greg, welcome back from the left coast. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Let us do, Sheldon, we're going to roll right through these. Let's get the first graphic up here. You asked people, is it time for a change in government in the province of Ontario? 48% strongly agree with that notion, 22% somewhat agreeing. And go to the other end here, only 10% strongly disagreeing, 11% somewhat disagreeing. Traditionally, Greg, when you're looking at these kinds of numbers, what do they portend for the party in power?
Well, we actually ask a second question as well, which is the Liberals may have their problem, but they're still the best party to form government. And what we find with that is 39% agree with that statement.
39% agree that the Liberals are still the best party to be the government of Ontario.
Right. So what really matters as you get into the election is how conflicted voters resolve their conflicts. And so we have a really large chunk of the Liberal pool, a much larger chunk than they had in a previous election, that feel both that it's time for a change and think the Liberals are the best of a bad lot.
Okay, you've got to explain that to me. How is it 70% of the people somewhat agree or strongly agree with the notion that the government's got to go, but the largest chunk think actually they'd still be the best people to run the province?
Well, it's, you know, like many people in Ontario cheering for the Toronto Leafs, but still believing they could do a better job, right? That's really what it comes down to.
Okay, let's do the horse race numbers. Again, Sheldon, we'll bring these ones up. You know the standard question. If an election were held today, where would you mark your X? The PC Party of Ontario is in first at 31%. The Liberals only 4 points back in second at 27%. The NDP in third at 14%. The Greens winding it up at 4%. Go to the far end of that, 14% still undecided. If that's what Election Day looked like next June, what does the Ontario look like in seat count?
Well, right now, that actually is enough to give the Tories the majority. They would win somewhere. It's a redistributed system with new boundaries. So you need to have 63 seats to win, and the Tories would win somewhere between 67 and 69 from our initial modeling.
Because you're assuming the undecideds would break out in pretty much the same proportion,
right? Or more likely not vote.
Or not vote, okay.
Right. A lot of the people that are undecided are people, when you call them up and you say, hi, I'm calling to do an opinion poll, they say, well, you've called the wrong person. I don't really have an opinion.
You got to explain this one to me as well. With all of the barnacles that have stuck to the ship of state and all of the difficulties the Liberals had on so many different issues, why is there only a 4-point difference between first and second place?
Because 30 to 31% of Ontarians wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I see a Liberal. And so there's this core Liberal brand that keeps the Liberals in the race. And that's based on values, right? So one of the challenges that Tories have had in the past is that they've been defined by austerity. And when you ask people what's more important, keeping spending within the government's ability to pay or spending according to the public's need, it's no more than 35 or 40% saying the ability to pay. 55, 60% will say according to need. And so that austerity has really limited the Tory ability to grow. The other thing that's been a challenge for the Tories, and we've seen it big time south of the border lately with Trump, but we saw it in Toronto with Ford, is that there's a cultural dimension to politics. And the Tory base is very right on the cultural dimensions, things like how they feel about immigrants or how they feel about the pace of change, things like that. But the average Ontarian isn't with that Tory base. And so the challenge for the Tories is how do they move into, for lack of a better words, a sort of free enterprise or striving space. So a place where people say that profit brings out the best of people, not the worst, but they also think that government should roll up its sleeves and get involved and help companies succeed, not stay back, lay out the playing field and let the strong survive.
We are conflicted. Let me ask you about the Tory leader, Patrick Brown, who's been the PC party leader for 2.5 years. I talk to candidates who knock on doors. The biggest thing that I hear, that they hear back from members of the public is, we don't know anything about this guy. Right. Is that good or bad?
It's mixed. So This time in the last election cycle, when they knocked on the door, a third of them said, "I don't like your leader."
That was Tim Hudak.
Yeah, so if you look at where things are now compared to where they were then, Patrick has, among the people that know them, which is a little under half, has a net positive impression with voters, which is not something the Tories have had. But the issue here is the law of the jungle is either be eaten, the law of politics is defined or be defined. So the wild card going up to the election, the thing that will move, guaranteed it will move, and so the question of which way it moves is really important, is that 50% that don't know what they think of Patrick Brown.
Which suggests the Liberals have not successfully framed him as Dr. Evil yet.
Right. And, you know, the real interesting thing here is that at this point in the last election cycle, the Working Family Coalition was out there branding Tim Hudak. In a previous election, they did the same thing. In this election, we have not seen third-party advertising trying to define the Tory leader, and it's really interesting why.
You mentioned that Patrick Brown's favorability is basically on the plus side. He's +8 according to your calculations. Andrea Horwath is +20. She is the most popular of the leaders.
Right.
Kathleen Wynne is -40.
Yeah.
Put into perspective what all of those numbers mean.
Well, we've tracked Ontario politics monthly since the spring of 2000, so 17 years of tracking. We have never, not in Mike Harris, Ernie Eves, or Dalton McGuinty's worst days, seen a leader with stronger negatives than Kathleen Wynne has. And there's real passion behind that dislike. What I find striking is that when you look across the country and you see situations like this, normally there's sort of a list of war crimes, specific things they've done. So you think about Jim Prentice in Alberta, you know, first thing he did is that he cut a backroom deal with the opposition, the first real opposition they had, and pulled him into the government caucus.
Yep.
Then the second thing that he did was he said, when they were talking about the financial challenges facing the province, look in the mirror.
Look in the mirror, remember
and
that?
then he changed the fixed election date so he could have an election date earlier, which the public perceived as rigging the election to favor himself.
So that's a list of war crimes.
That was war crimes. People knew that he was not the change they were looking for after that third thing. What did Kathleen Wynne do? Right now, what we're seeing is disappointment. That when in the last election, a lot of people said, you know what, I want the Liberals, but I want new and different Liberals. And Kathleen Wynne is promising me new and different. She seems new and different. Maybe she'll really be new and different, right? But we've all heard that saying, you know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Well, having said that, Andrea Horwath traditionally polls as the most popular of the three leaders, but it doesn't seem to translate into votes for her party. So we shouldn't look into that too much either, I guess, do we?
Well, actually, the striking thing and one of the most significant things in this data, and we combine these polls, every month we do 600 telephone interviews, landline and cell, and we combine them every quarter to see what's going on. When we look at what's happening in seats the NDP won in the last election, the NDP have lost, or look like they'll lose half those seats. And that's even with Andrea holding her position as having the most favorable impression and actually up a little bit as best leader.
Okay, I got to get in your face a little bit here.
Yeah.
Polling is supposed to be what people thought yesterday.
Right.
It doesn't tell you what people are going to think tomorrow.
Right.
So how can you predict that the NDP are going to lose half their seats on the basis of what you've heard yesterday?
Right. So based on if the election were today, they would lose half their seats.
Okay.
But the issue is that their vote is so far down in those seats that it would take a lot of work to boost it back up. Now, the irony is, though, is that the NDP could lose half their seats. But if the Liberals come up a bit and take some of those, right now we're showing the Tories at sort of 4 to 6 seat majority, if they can take back 8 of those seats, it's a minority. And whether she
Tory
is,
minority.
Well, it's a minority.
Oh.
So voters pick majority governments, the legislature picks minority governments.
Yeah.
And what you saw in BC is that the BC Liberals finished one short shy of a majority government and lost the government. And you saw the same thing in Ontario with Frank Miller. Where Frank
Second
Miller,
place and third place combined.
Right, and so the issue is that if voters don't deliver a majority to anyone, then it's up to the parliamentarians to decide who should be the premier.
In which case, Andrea Horwath has a decision to make
Then
about who she backs.
it all comes down to Andrea in that case. So she could have half the seats, but those seats could be a lot more important.
Gotcha. Let's talk about electricity, because for the past many years, this has been sort of issue number one on the government's plate. You know that they have brought in this 25% on average rate reduction across the province, some people experiencing actually greater reductions. Sheldon, bring up this graphic here, Fair Hydro Plan Impact. And if you would, Greg, just take us through this chart and tell us what people now believe the state of play is on the hydro issue.
Well, the issue here is, the first thing to understand is that people don't know very much about this plan, right? The first thing we did is we asked people, are your bills going up or are they going down? And 62% said they're going up still.
But they're not.
Down. They're not, but there's reality, and you can bring in a policy expert to talk about that. But if I'm into perception, and 62% perceive their bill going up. The other thing that's really important here is only 41% say that they're at least somewhat familiar with the Fair Hydro Plan. So the issue here is we then explain what's in it, and they react to that, and then we say, what's the net impact?
But I noticed that if you go to the right of this chart that's up now, the bar on the right, 54% saying that the Liberal Fair Hydro Impact Plan has not made any difference in their lives at all?
Right. Well, no, not that it's not made a difference in their lives. This doesn't make a difference to how you're going to vote.
To how you're going to vote. Okay.
Right. So people vote for all sorts of different things, and right now electricity is the fourth most important issue, after affordability generally, after healthcare, and after jobs. So there's a lot of people saying, you know what, I've already made up my mind. I know what party I'm voting for. I don't really care what their position is on this or that because I know where I'm going, or other things are more important.
If hydro is the fourth most important issue now, is that not a victory for the Liberals, who have managed to take it off?
Yeah, it's really good news for the
people's
Liberals
agenda,
because it was driving their vote down in a big way. The other thing that's important here is that the average doesn't really matter to us. What matters to us is how the Liberal voting coalition is responding. And so core Liberals, the people that say it's not time for a change and that the Liberals are the best able to form the government, they've got a plus 34 on that. So 34% are more likely, not less likely, to support the Liberals as a result of the plan. So it's rallying the base. And when we look at this, at the conflicted, the time for a change Liberals, people that say it's time for a change, but the Liberals are best of a bad lot, they have a plus 20, they're a plus 18 with those people. So it's rallying their base, and it's having a strong net positive impact with the swing voters they need to win. So for the Liberals, that overall slide that shows a relatively negative balance overall doesn't really matter to them because it's working with the people they need it to work with.
Let's also, Sheldon, I'm on the bottom of page 4 here, and I want to, let's talk about which party would be the likely second choice for voters in the province. And your latest poll suggests that while the NDP may only have 14% support on election day, look at this, they are the overwhelming second choice for most voters. Tell me if this is important.
It is important if there is change in the election. So if either the Tories lose ground or the Liberals lose ground in the election itself, the most popular second choice of both those groups of voters is the NDP. And it's quite something to have the NDP as the #1 second choice of Tories.
Yes.
Right? That's not traditionally what you expect. But the challenge for the NDP is that their second choice vote is the least likely to switch. Right, so basically, the people are with the Liberals and with the Tories are less likely to switch away from their parties than New Democrats are likely to switch away from the New Democratic Party, and that's that whole issue of will my vote count.
Greg, I'm looking at all your numbers here, and I'm trying to find out if there is any good news for those who support the Green Party. Is there?
No, is the short answer. In part, though, because the Liberals and the NDP to a lesser degree, but the Liberals in particular, really embraced a green agenda. So on things like climate change and cap and trade and moving off of coal and all the rest of that, the Liberal core message is really focused on delivering a greener Ontario. Now, whether they're actually doing it, whether the environmental movement would tell you that they think Kathleen Wynne's government is where they would like to see a government is a whole other issue. But nonetheless, if you are concerned about green issues, environmental issues, you're hearing both the NDP and the Liberals, well, even the PCs, right? Patrick Brown with his promise in terms of bringing in a carbon tax. All three parties are fighting over who's going to be greenest.
Just as one federal Green MP has made a difference to the way things happen in Ottawa and has brought some attention. You know, Elizabeth May, you could argue, has been a very effective one-person caucus. Do you see the seeds of the Greens winning even one seat in the legislature next time?
I don't. I mean, if you look at what happened in BC where they elected 3, right? The issue was they became the third alternative, and we have a third alternative here in Andrea Horwath, right? And if you look at what she did in the last election, she, even though she lost some ground on the left, she picked up in the center the populist vote with an affordability agenda. So, and as good as her numbers are now, as good as her net favorables are now, in both of the last 2 elections where she was the leader of the NDP, she actually went up. She actually grew in favorables, which is unusual for a politician in an election. So essentially, there's no need for the Greens. At least the public doesn't see need for the Green, even the people that are the strongest environmentalists, because they see the main parties fighting over the issues that they care about.
Well, let me do one follow-up on the issue of the environment, and that is, of course, we've had in the province now for a year a cap-and-trade policy.
Right.
That is the #1 pollution control program for the government of Ontario. Not a carbon tax,
right.
Cap and trade.
Right.
What do your numbers show about how aware the public is of that fact?
Well, as an issue, the whole issue of carbon pricing is a lot like Patrick Brown's image, in that it's really undefined in the public's mind. So when we ask people, from what you know, does Ontario have a carbon pricing policy? And if it does, what is it? Less than half were actually prepared to say whether Ontario had a cap and trade or carbon pricing policy. And those that were prepared to hazard a guess, guessed wrong. They said it was a carbon pricing, a carbon tax that we had in Ontario, not cap and trade.
How can there be so little awareness of the Liberals' literally #1 environmental initiative of the past year?
It's buried. Right, you don't see it as as an item on your bills. It's buried underneath, so people don't see it. They don't know. A lot of people, most people, have not perceived a financial impact, and those that have, there's many who have not felt a major impact.
Okay, in our last 30 seconds here, I want to ask you, how baked in do you think these numbers are right now? Or is there still plenty of opportunity for parties to make their case in a campaign and change all these numbers dramatically?
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity for change here, and it comes in 2 ways. Number one, the fundamental dynamic that's keeping Liberals out of the race is that they have not been able to bring those conflicted voters home, and particularly in their own base. They're underperforming in their base. And if they just pick up 2% there off the Tories, it's a tie. Right? That's all it takes. 2 people out of 100 changing their mind from Tories to the Liberals, and it's a tie. The second thing is that there are a lot of things that people don't know very well that could become things that everyone knows a lot about. So one is Patrick Brown, right? Another is carbon pricing. And there are more issues like that. So when we look at this, what we're seeing is that the feelings about the parties are running deep, and the feelings about Kathleen Wynne are running deep. And those feelings are making it harder for the Liberals now than at any time since 1999. But that being said, it's not all one way.
We love it when you visit us. Fascinating numbers to chew over. Greg Lyle, Innovative Research Group, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.